yesterday shadowing her, or in starting Thursday evening at her talk at the university. She's got tremendous energy, tremendous knowledge, and is wonderful at reaching out to people. Dr. Shirley Jackson is a professor and chair of Black Studies at Portland State University. Her areas of research and specialization are race, ethnicity, gender, and social movements. She's the editor of the Handbook of Race, Class, and Gender, co-editor of Page Women, Incarceration, Representation, and Media. She met yesterday, part of what we do after the speaker presents at the University of Idaho, which we co-sponsor with the Office of Multicultural Affairs. The speaker gets a chance to meet with the high school students from the Human Rights International Club who are helping us here today, and then meets with the board of the Human Rights Task Force. And I learned her background. She's from Buffalo, New York, the first one in her family to attend college. She started out wanting to help people, and she has certainly done that in years of education and leadership, traveling throughout the world, writing, editing, and she told me even about having middle school students come to her university to learn about Black Studies. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Shirley Jackson.
I have been so busy since I arrived on Thursday, but I do thank you all for inviting me in this very special venue and for this very special event. We are in the throes of many events, beginning with the King holiday and ending February 28th, Black History Month is February, where I am so busy as a chair of the Black Studies Department that I usually cannot wait until March 1st rolls around. But I want to thank all of you who are responsible for bringing me. My special thanks goes to Joanne and Juanita for contacting me initially and inviting me to speak. Certainly to Vivi Gonzalez and Jesse Martinez for being my taxi drivers, as I have been spending so much time going back and forth to different places. But I also want to thank you all for attending this event, being here. Special thanks also to the mayor and to the members of the task force. And I also want to give a special thanks to the students that I've met since I've been here, the students at the University of Idaho, and most certainly the students at Moscow High School who are members of the Human Rights and Environmental Club, and I see some of them around the room, and it has just really been a pleasure. I do want to give a special shout out to Ari, because I really wanted to say to Ari, you really just have too much time on your hands. But anyway. And I also wanted to say something to one of the Rosa Parks Awards recipients, Moni. I really do appreciate the hard work that you do, and I think that the fact that you have received an award named after Rosa Parks is especially noteworthy, because a lot of people do not know that Rosa Parks was an investigator with the NAACP, and she investigated the sexual assault cases of African American women. And if you want to read up more about that, there's a book that talks about it, the woman whose case she went to investigate, Recy Taylor. And if you look that up, it's a very disturbing account, but I think it is something that we need to know about when we think about who plays these important roles in history, and that they're usually doing things other than sitting on a bus, refusing to give up a seat. And I also want to mention that when I was an undergraduate student at Wayne State University in Detroit, I had the pleasure of meeting Rosa Parks. Now, it sounds like it would have been this wonderful experience. However, I was with some friends, and I was further away, just probably maybe 4 of us, and Rosa Parks and another woman came out of an event on campus. They entered, my friends were like, oh, and I guess I didn't hear what they were saying about, oh, that's Rosa Parks. I just heard, oh. And this woman comes up and she shakes her hands, and I'm thinking, okay, well, she's clearly somebody important. And she's shaking our hands, so I'm not sure what's going on here, but yes, okay. Shook her hand. And I remember her saying to this woman, oh, she looks just like my niece. And I'm thinking, okay, so here's this woman, I look like her niece. And after she left, and I'm with my friends, and I said, who was that? And they just said, oh, that was Rosa Parks. I was like, oh my God, that was Rosa Parks. So that was my moment. It's just those things that happen to you sometimes. Okay, I have just passed my 3-year anniversary as chair of the Black Studies Department at Portland State University, and it has been an interesting ride for me. I really have enjoyed the thrill of being connected to a university that has the motto, let knowledge serve the city. I also have the pleasure of working every day with students, faculty, staff, and community members. And it's one of those positions that does keep me busy, it does keep me involved, but it also allows me this opportunity to see what kinds of things we still need to do in the community and what we need to do at large as a nation. I have lived in 10 states for various periods of time, some as brief as a month or 2, and others for a decade or more. It is the difference in the way we see, learn about, and do race, and talk about matters of diversity in various regions of the country that I find intriguing. However, central to diversity is the idea that we should all embrace not only the notion of diversity, but the act of diversity. It is one of the tenets, if you will, of the civil rights movement, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others. It is also the way in which we as a global society have learned to adapt as we engage in expanding our concept of community. The importance of having a community that is recognized for its diversity, not simply as a feel-good activity, but one that truly recognizes in spirit and in action that diversity matters, is key. Simply stated, we all benefit from a diverse environment, and yet, as a nation, we can do better. Last year, I had the pleasure of reviewing scholarship applications named for a former Women's Studies faculty member and supporter of the Black Studies Department at Portland State. As I read the applications, I was struck by the diverse group of students applying for the scholarship. Yes, many were from marginalized racial ethnic minority groups, African American and Latinx. But there were others who were not. I noticed with disappointment the absence of a knowledge of African Americans, one of the requirements of the scholarship. There was also little understanding of what was meant by diversity. Looking at some of the essays written by the applicants, I realized that their understanding of African Americans was limited to the knowledge gained from reading perhaps one book, or having friends who accepted them as the only or one of the few racial minorities at their school. However, there were those few students who wrote heart-wrenching essays about an understanding of the African American community. They brought to the forefront in unambiguous ways real-life examples of how insidiously problems related to race and class have negatively impacted their lives. Becoming a victim of homelessness because one's neighborhood changed so quickly that there was no way the family could hang on to its home due to not only gentrification, but low wages, as a result of having to live in the family car, or having to live with a grandmother because one's parents were drug addicted, in prison, or simply not in a position to engage in positive parenting. And then there were those who were racing to beat the clock to graduate from high school, either making the financially shrewd decision to take as many college credit courses while in high school to cut down the cost of obtaining a college degree and go on to college before one is no longer under the guardianship of the state. This is what diversity looks like. I've been thinking a lot about the kinds of futures. I've been thinking a lot about the kind of future students who apply to colleges and universities who are the first in their families to do so. Those who visit campuses and are in awe of their size, the diversity of the students and faculty they sometimes see on a campus. These are students who are being given a chance to make decisions that have a direct impact on their futures, selecting majors and minors and having the ability to change them once they learn that there are more options than they first realized. They have the ability to participate in organizations on campus, political, social, Greek, cultural, humanitarian, and so on, and decide how they will navigate the diverse and complex environment so new to many of them. When Martin Luther King Jr. talked about black boys and girls going to school hand in hand with white boys and girls, I am sure that even he would be surprised at how diverse our schools and communities are today, especially our universities. A year after the 1963 March on Washington, the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 passed, and a year after that, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 came into being. Since that time, we have seen many changes in the way we look at issues related to the civil rights movement, those that it set out to accomplish, those that it actually reached. Many of these have been successful, while others are still a work in progress. Last year at Portland State, the Black Studies Department, Joanne mentioned this, the Black Studies Department invited students to come to our campus who were in a local high school. They actually had two separate events, and I'll talk about each. The first one was an event that was the brainchild of a former PSU alum who was teaching at one of the high schools. This teacher, who taught a course in African American literature, wanted to bring students to the university to talk about their work. So we had about 130 students from Portland's Grant High School's African American literature course come to the university. 16 of those students presented the papers that they had written for course. Now, I should mention that this particular program is part of what is called the Challenge Program. It is found in a number of schools in the United States, and it partners high schools with universities so that students taking courses in the Challenge Program receive college credit for their high school classes. Several teachers from the high school, the vice principal, and parents were also in the audience that day. They had come to hear 16 students selected from a pool of 140 present their papers. The students selected the topics for their papers, worked on them during the school year, and competed for the opportunity to present their work at the symposium. The depth of student knowledge about race at the high school level was indeed impressive. They wrote on topics such as, quote, appropriation of midwifery and birthing by white male doctors. Cobra effect, American liberalism's promotion of white supremacy. Social Darwinism, implicit bias, and the European superiority complex. Conditions of creating a system of massive incarceration. And white appropriation of African American folktales. Yes, these were high school students, not college students. The demand for the course has become so great that this year the school has 3 teachers, and instead of 1, there are now 7 sections being offered at the school. The symposium will take place again this year with a larger pool of students who are participating, and also a larger number of students who want to show that the knowledge that they gained from that course is what diversity can look like. Also last year, some 15 current members of the middle school Black Student Union and their allies visited Portland State to meet with the university's Black Student Union. The students in the middle school brought with them their non-Black allies. This group of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders included students who are African American, African, white, Latinx, Native American, and mixed race. For the large majority, they had never been on a college campus, so it should have not been a surprise when they asked me questions such as, do they allow animals in the dorms? And what time do they eat lunch? And is there a bell that tells them when to change classes? And my personal favorite, because I had just been asked a question about the ages of students attending the university. If you are pregnant, are you still able to go to school here? Yes, I raised my eyebrows at that one. These very energetic and curious students spent time in a Caribbean spirituality class taught where college students included them in their group discussions, answering questions they were given in preparation for their final exam. To see these different generations of students where the older ones taught the younger was truly inspiring. I thought the middle school students would enjoy seeing what goes on in a college class, but did not realize the thrill that the PSU students would get out of the experience. Their faces were beaming as the youngsters left the classroom, and they realized that they had gained something from having to explain what they had been learning this term. As many of us know, the best way to learn something is to have to teach it. This is what diversity looks like. Another highlight of the day was having the middle school Black Student Union members meet with the PSU student members of the Black Student Union and students in my African American Community Development course. The middle school Black students and their non-Black allies explained to the PSU Student Union members, Black Student Union members, how they deal with issues of racism at their school. As they explained, it doesn't really work to tell a teacher or the principal and expect them to do something if a student is using a derogatory word or making hateful statements. Instead, they work peer-to-peer to address the issue by explaining it to the offender how words like the N-word, with a hard R, can be hurtful. They understand that it makes sense to use this strategy because there is a lot to be said for not only the building of leadership skills, but group cohesion, whereby at an age where the opinions of one's peers can mean so much, no one wants to be seen as insensitive or, in this case, racist. In a 90-minute discussion, the mentoring of the middle school students by the college students was enough to make anyone forget that it was the last week of the term. That is what diversity looks like. When I visit college campuses, I look at the faces of the people, and I look at those who identify as veterans, those who transfer from community colleges. I've gone to campuses where it's a private liberal arts college, and you have students who are from very wealthy families. But on those campuses, there are also working class students who are trying hard to navigate being in an environment where wealth, and a lot of wealth, is very foreign to them. I see students I have taught who encourage friends to read and sign book because they found that book so enlightening. I see senior auditors, senior citizens, who have shared with me and their classmates points of view, evidence not only of their having been brought up in different eras, but having had different life experiences. And in the case of one of my former senior auditors, I see her sharing numerous pictures with the class of herself climbing mountains, traveling the globe, participating in marches and protests, and inspiring younger students in the class who look at her and say, I want to be like her when I grow up. this is what diversity looks like. Let us think about those students who take advantage of being informed and actively engaged by involving themselves on committees and organizations and task forces and playing important roles in student government. These students can shape your high school and college campuses in unique ways, and we have only to wonder how many numerous people they will inspire when they go out into the world. One of the undergraduate students I encountered while a graduate TA years ago at the University of California, Santa Barbara, contacted me Thanksgiving weekend 2 years ago to let me know how life was going with him, his wife, and 2 children. This student, who was originally from Belgium, went on to become a member of the Black Student Union at UC Santa Barbara. I actually think he became president. Went to law school after he graduated from college and later sought work and continues to work for Human Rights Watch. When he emailed me, he was emailing from Malawi. This is what diversity looks like. Some of us have the pleasure of working with students who have already left the world of undergraduate studies and have moved into either graduate studies or work in the community. I am hopeful when they leave that they will take with them some of the lessons they have learned about diversity in its many forms, particularly those like mine. Here I think of graduate students who are moving onward and upward, such as a former nurse now pursuing her doctorate in nursing. As a student in one of my classes, this non-traditional age student enrolled at a nearby university, and she took a course I was teaching on the African American experience. She took that course not because she had to, but because it related to one of the areas that she was planning to study and research while in her doctoral program. This student wanted to successfully navigate what it would be like to be able to learn about a community that she was a member of, but a community that she had not taken courses in. I'm going to give off my own life here. So the same student, because of her age and experience in hospitals, volunteered to be at the hospital on Thanksgiving when one of the students in the class, an athlete, was having surgery. Actually, because of the material I was teaching in the course that term, several students volunteered to go with him because they were so concerned after reading a book I had assigned titled Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on African Americans from Colonial Times to the Present, that they could not imagine this student being allowed to go under surgery without someone being there to protect his interests. And I highly recommend that book. It's by Harriet Washington. I highly recommend it for anyone who is interested in learning and understanding the troubling history and the contemporary treatment of African Americans from the slave era to the present when it comes to medicine. My students were so engrossed in the material that they viewed the medical profession quite differently at the end of the term than when the term started. On Thanksgiving that day, I spent my morning exchanging emails with this student and in her newly adopted role as aunt to the student undergoing surgery. She had to be a family member. From the moment that he went into surgery, during his brief stay in recovery, up until when he was finally picked up from the hospital by a fellow athlete. Now, I do mention that this student was an athlete, but he was also from Alabama. He had no family in the area. He also elected to do surgery on Thanksgiving because he had no place to go. We have to make sure our students, including our athletes, recruited from afar and others, are part of that diverse population, that diverse community in our midst, who cannot simply go home for the holidays. This also applies to those students who may be homeless. This may also apply to those students who are under the care of Department of Children and Families and other services. We sometimes think that they can just simply go home. They too need a place where they can feel connected on and off the playing field, on and off the campus, and in the community. They are all what diversity looks like. One area where diversity has experienced a change depending on one's country of origin is those students who are international students. They diversify campuses in a way that is not always recognized. We do not always do our best to make them feel included on campus and in the broader community. Some have found safe spaces to connect with other international students, but wouldn't it be nice to see them connect with students who are not international students? I received a call from Joanne Manita before I left Portland to come to Idaho, and she was asking me about the students who are here today and whether or not, because it was the tradition for the students serving to dress in the attire of different countries, whether or not I thought that was appropriate. And one of my good friends, she actually said, well, you know, if you have to ask, the answer is probably no. But I actually responded quite differently. I actually had a very different position. I understood the question and the fact that a lack of diversity in a community may result in a need to not only bring up such questions, but can also result in a much needed discussion about what diversity means and how is it being cultivated versus how is it being co-opted or even racist. Is it an attempt to show a respect or knowledge for a particular culture? This is quite different from what we're seeing in the post-election era, where hate speech and hate crimes have increased dramatically. We also, every Halloween, seem to have the unfortunate experience of having to re-educate students on college campuses about their inappropriate costume choices. I am not sure why we have, after so many years post-civil rights, have to be reminding students how inappropriate it is to be in blackface, redface, Nazi costumes, what have you. You would think as a country, and as a country that has had such a long history around issues of race, that we would know better. Yet somehow the idea of diversity in these settings is misinterpreted or the butt of a joke, rather than being a thoughtful conversation about racial and cultural diversity. That is what diversity should look like. Perhaps the students here today will stand up and keep their peers in check when they are going off track, engaging in inappropriate attire, speech, and behavior. How do we teach ourselves to appreciate diversity when we eat the foods of other cultures but ignore the value in learning different languages? I recall many years ago talking to a fellow graduate student at a conference who was really critical of people who would comment on how much they loved hearing the accents of people from France or England, but how no one ever said that about her language, Chinese. And how about being more cognizant about what we culturally appropriate, what we choose to embrace, and what we choose to shun or even ignore? There are different consequences for these. One of my biggest regrets about my college experience is that I did not study abroad. I think this is why I'm such a fan of study abroad programs. In fact, the study abroad program at my university has offered to send me to a diversity abroad conference in Boston this year. Since they're paying for it, I'm going. I hope that the students here, the younger ones, the ones who are in middle school, the ones who are in high school, and even those who may be in college, understand and consider the importance of being informed citizens of the world. I never traveled beyond Canada as a child, mostly to Niagara Falls, and later to Toronto, where many family members and friends would travel to the Caribbean Festival, Caravana. While attending graduate school in Santa Barbara, I would visit Mexico for the day with friends, not going far, just across the border. No passport was required, and it was enough to show me that the culture and lifestyle was indeed different. Later, I decided to expand my understanding of different languages and cultures that did not involve traveling abroad, but taking opportunities available on the campus of UC Santa Barbara. I always tell people that it was there that I learned how to really drink coffee, as we had coffee carts spread around the campus. And usually when the class would end, you're looking at the clock and timing yourself. Can you get to a coffee line and make it to your next class? It was also on the campus of UC Santa Barbara that I connected with the Black Studies Department, where as a sociology graduate student, I would later occasionally teach. I learned a lot about diversity in Black studies, and certainly in the sociology department, and it led to my making certain career choices after completing graduate school. My graduate school years is also where I learned about ethnomusicology, and where I would first hear the UC Santa Barbara Middle East Ensemble play. It was there where I saw my first belly dancer and decided that it was going to become my new hobby. So while the rest of my peers in the graduate program were off doing whatever, when I was not working one of my 3 jobs, I was off learning to belly dance. I performed Middle Eastern and Mediterranean dance forms, and not everyone can show you how to perform a Moroccan boudra, trance dance, an Egyptian cabaret-style belly dance complete with zills, finger cymbals, veil, and drum solo, or an Iraqi cane dance. I began performing with the dance ensemble on campus and around Santa Barbara. I danced at the Belly Dance Festival Rakasa, a Middle East dance festival in San Francisco, at the wedding of a Korean woman and her white American husband in LA, in Greek restaurants and down State Street with a troupe of belly dancers waving at my shocked professors at the solstice parade. I learned to appreciate the dance as an art form. And honestly, anyone who thinks it is easy or that it is the same as stripping and believes that it is only those with bodies like models who are belly dancers are sorely uninformed. Having grown up with in a large African American community, I knew that it was okay to have a thick or curvy body. But this was reinforced when I learned how bodies, women's bodies in particular, do not have to look like those we see on TV and in advertisements to be appreciated. I learned that women with bodies like mine in shape and skin color were appreciated in other parts of the world. Egyptians and Iranians invited me to their homes, the latter of which taught me how to cook Persian food and speak simple sentences in Farsi. I thought it would be interesting to learn a different language. So to offset graduate school and work, I decided to study Arabic. And I did so because I love to learn, but I also wanted to stop making up words to the songs I was listening and dancing to in Arabic. The people in these communities became my family. They welcomed me into their homes. And also, when it came time to celebrate important social events like birthdays and weddings, I was invited. I enjoyed the dances, the music, and the food. But diversity is not just these things. It is people. In 1954, the NAACP brought to the Supreme Court a segregation case that showed the disparity of funds appropriated to schools and evidence with findings from the famous Clark-Dow study that African American children suffered from segregated schools, understanding with great clarity that they were being treated differently as second-class citizens. With the Brown decision, public schools were desegregated, with the courts overturning the decision made in an earlier case in 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson, that allowed for separate but equal schools. The Supreme Court's decision in 1954 made it clear that separate but equal was inherently unequal. States that did not agree with the Supreme Court's decision to desegregate schools decided that they would close their schools, claiming states' rights. Some of them opened all-Christian private academies. But the thing that people don't really quite understand about that Brown decision was that when it talked about the impact of desegregated schools, that usually meant black children going to white schools. No one seemed to notice that African American teachers and the curriculum would suddenly disappear. The curriculum that had once included African American history did not follow African American students to the schools they integrated. If it had, this would have been what diversity could have looked like. Schools across the nation have been for decades resegregating. How is diversity evident in our communities at large when we continue to be witness to the process of residential and school resegregation by social class and race? I spoke Thursday night about the process of gentrification and how it has changed Portland in particular. Its north and northeast neighborhoods that historically were African American have become predominantly white. After the talk, I spoke to an alum who asked me how we could, an alum at the University of Idaho, who asked me how we could prevent this from happening. And I suggested that property owners, home and business, look carefully at what brings changes to neighborhoods that end up undergoing gentrification. One of these is a loss of investment in the community. This includes the decline in services and tax base, but can also include a lack of participation by community members in local politics. However, it would also require that those parties that are moving into such neighborhoods understand what they are doing when they displace former residents because they are able to get a good deal on a house, not realizing or not caring that they are subsequently changing the neighborhood in a way that may push certain groups out while pulling others in. There is a tipping point at which, when neighborhoods become less white, minorities move in and whites engage in white flight. Yet there is little attention paid to how to address the tipping point in neighborhoods that are at risk for gentrification. How can neighborhoods maintain their diversity without fully pushing out and pulling in residents? If this could be done, we might have more neighborhoods that are diverse in race, social class, businesses and services that have, let me repeat that. If this could be done, we might have more neighborhoods that were diverse in race, social class, businesses, and services, rather than those that have it all or that have very little. This is what diversity could look like. The Thursday night, I had the pleasure of meeting with a middle school student who asked a question after my talk about how students like her who are in schools that lack diversity can do their part to advance the struggle for racial equality. And I want to read what was handed to me a little while ago when I first came in today. This is a second student from the same school. Dear Dr. Jackson, I would first just like to say that I truly enjoyed your speech and was very moved by its and was especially moved by it. Sorry. Little teeny print, my eyes are not as I truly appreciated your speech and was very moved by it, especially your words about student action and collaboration. My question, the reason behind this letter is as they wanted to ask, how might I use my position as a young student to influence people? And I really like that question because you've got young people who are wanting to know, well, what can I do? How can I change things? I think one of the things that we need to remember is the way that we teach students history is a way that no longer works given the diverse populations and the diverse nation that we have become. When I met with high school students yesterday and when I met with the college students as well, I emphasized the importance of taking advantage of learning about history and connecting it to their studies with the aim of learning how the perception of racial and ethnic minorities in a country is related to their treatment today. We talked about the ways in which skin color, social class, and laws worked to keep people of different races apart. For example, Susie Guillory Phipps, a woman who thought she was white and found that according to her Louisiana birth certificate she was black due to the one-drop rule, was a woman in 1972 who decided to attempt to change her race on her birth certificate, but without success. She had lived her life as a white woman. She was married to a white man. She lived in a community that was a white community. She raised her children as white, so for all intents and purposes, Susie Guillory Phipps was white. Had she not attempted to apply for a passport, she never would have known what her birth certificate said, and it was then that she realized this difference in race. Susie Guillory Phipps brought her case to court, arguing that her birth certificate should be changed because, after all, the one-drop rule was an antiquated way of looking at race. One drop of black blood made her black. However, according to her, she was white. And as I said, she lost her case. Mildred Jeter and Richard Loving, who were prevented from residing in the state of Virginia because their 1958 marriage in Washington, D.C. was not recognized by the state of Virginia. The judge ruled that they had violated the law, stating in his opinion his rationale for upholding the ban against interracial marriage. Quote, Almighty God created the races, white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. And but for the interference with his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix. End quote. The Lovings were sentenced to a year in prison for violating the state's anti-miscegenation law. The sentence was suspended with the caveat that they leave the state and not return as a couple for 25 years. They went on to fight to legally reside in Virginia as husband and wife. Their case went before the Supreme Court, and it ruled in 1967 that miscegenation laws were unconstitutional. The Supreme Court decision read in part that, quote, there is patently no legitimate overriding purpose independent of invidious racial discrimination which justifies this classification. The fact that Virginia prohibits only interracial marriages involving white persons demonstrates that the racial classifications must stand on their own justification as measures designed to maintain white supremacy. End quote. Anti-miscegenation laws were overturned, and the remaining 16 states that still have such bans. And I want to mention that in order to understand the true depth of anti-miscegenation laws and the fear of race mixing with certain races, while only 5 states banned whites from marrying all non-whites, those that mentioned specific groups that whites could not marry all listed blacks as the groups that whites were banned from marrying. The 2 cases I mentioned show how diversity was not something that a nation built on white supremacy was willing to embrace. We cannot remain in our separate boxes all the time throughout all our lives. Instead of building walls along borders, we need to be crossing them and learning what it is like on the other side. As a member of the state of Oregon, Department of Education Ethnic Studies Advisory Committee, I am working with others to ensure that we do our part, moving towards an ethnic studies curriculum in the social sciences K through 12 throughout the state. Doing our part means educating students early and pushing the boundaries of the teachers who may not feel comfortable including ethnic content in their curriculum, but who will need to do so all the same. When implemented in just 2 years, diversity in the curriculum may no longer be something that schools struggle to implement, but is something that they simply do. Teachers and administrators at these schools will need to rethink the way they have learned about diversity or the lack thereof. Some schools have never thought about how to address deficits in the way in which they teach diversity. Instead, there is a lot of time spent on taking tests, but isn't it important to teach about people, to teach about diversity? I would be remiss if I did not mention diversity and how it is also perceived on college campuses. I've heard well-intentioned people express a desire to silence anyone who does not share their opinion and ostracize those they believe have an agenda because their opinion is not like their own. I find this extremely concerning. The focus is on being right and having the right opinion. Bullying people instead of conversing with them seems to be where we are heading as a nation. Shutting down those who have another perspective on a college campus should give us all reason to pause. A growing fear that you can no longer talk or express a different perspective, for fear that you will be harassed, threatened, or attacked is real for many. If we're going to ask for diversity, then does it mean only the kind of diversity we agree with or are comfortable with? If so, is that diversity? I believe in diversity of opinion, no matter how silly, ignorant, or wrong-headed I personally believe it to be. However, you have a right to say it, but it is also my right not to listen. However, I do worry about the way in which we handle these kinds of conversations. I fear by silencing those I do not agree, I fear that if I were to silence those I do not agree with, this gives them the right to shut down my voice, my opinion, my right to say what I believe. There are few places where we get the opportunity to have discussions that make us uncomfortable, and the university is one of them. Yet diversity may not always include the opinions of those we don't agree with. And if we believe in the importance of diversity, we have to respect differences of opinion even when we don't agree. This is what diversity should look like. I hope I have given you some idea of what diversity looks like and what it could look like. When we think about Martin Luther King Jr. and what the civil rights movement has taught us and what we have gained from it, it was about creating spaces for all and moving towards ensuring not only civil rights, but human rights. We can look upon the movement as an appreciation of difference, and we can now welcome an environment of diverse people, diverse opinions, beliefs, and thoughts. This is what diversity looks like. Thank you.